Hello and welcome back to the Planet and Smart Cities stage here at CogX. Thank you to Joy, who's handed back over the microphone, so to speak, virtually from our hybrid stage in King's Cross. I can't believe it's the final session here on our stage. It's been a jam-packed day, and I think arguably we've saved the best for last. For those of you who haven't met me yet, or if you've just joined the Planet and Smart City stage for this particular session, welcome. We'd love for you to get involved and join the conversation online, and send your questions through on the Hopin app with the hashtag CogX2021. My name is Anushka Sharma. I've been the MC of this stage over the past few days, and I'm the founder of space and innovation tech consultancy Nought. Coming up now, we have a session which is called Winning Hearts and Minds, Participatory Futures and Behaviour Change. This panel gathers artists and the latest research from the field of collective intelligence to explore how we can engage people to imagine and create more sustainable and inclusive futures. I can't wait for this session. I'm delighted to welcome your moderator for this session. It's Alex Verdachevskaya. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Alex, who is the principal researcher at the Centre for Collective Intelligence Design at Nesta. Welcome, Alex. The stage is yours.
Thanks a lot, Anushka, and thank you to everyone who has signed in, especially if you are in the UK or in Northern Europe, where it's a very, very hot day. So we really appreciate you joining us and staring at a screen rather than being somewhere where you would probably be much cooler, but hopefully it will be worth it for you. So we've got a great lineup of speakers who will be telling you about their work and how it engages with the concept of being more inclusive and participatory in the ways that we think about the future, particularly in relation to environmental change. So I'll go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to invite you to imagine that it is 2032, that you are based in the US, that it's a couple of months before the election, and that the image that you see on the screen is one of the candidates, someone who is a surprise candidate in the race, and who is running on a platform that encourages climate action and social justice. Her name is Sage Moore, and you have the opportunity to ask her questions. What would you ask her? What is the 2032 that you want to see? And importantly, what kind of decisions would you need to make between now and then in order to make that future a reality? These are just some of the questions that the creators of Resilience 2032 posed to the participants in their project that they ran last year in the build-up to the US 2020 election. They used a technique which they called social media theater, which asked participants to interact with these types of candidates that they were proposing for 2032, to ask them questions and to create their own artifacts of the future to help create and build that world and make it a reality, make it seem like a reality that it was 2032. Resilience 2032 is just one example of the new types of approaches for involving members of the public in thinking about and shaping potential futures. At Nesta, we call this range of approaches participatory futures. And at their heart is the democratization and trying to encourage long-term thinking in order to help us make better decisions collectively in the present day. Our research has shown the great versatility of these participatory futures approaches. So on the screen at the moment, I have the 5 different types of methods that are typically used based on analysis that we did mapping case studies from across the world. So for example, to tap into the play typology of participatory futures, practitioners typically use online multiplayer games or role-playing or simulation and invite participants to make choices and game out what will happen if they make those choices. Under the immerse category, you often have people drawing on interactive theater techniques or augmented and virtual reality in order to really create that feeling of being in an alternative future. I won't have time to go through each of them, but for any of you who are interested in getting some tangible examples of what we mean by participatory futures, you'll find them in our report that we published last year called Our Futures by the People for the People. And some of the reasons that decision makers might choose to start using these techniques are, well, frankly, we're not very good at making decisions about the future. Research shows that when it comes to thinking about long-term consequences, we discount long-term impacts in favor of short-term gains. We're also not very good at thinking about uncertainty, ambiguity, complexity, or to consider multiple perspectives when we're making decisions and thinking about how they might affect not just ourselves, but others. And participatory futures involving a large variety of people in both thinking about gaming out various possibilities and actually creating and shaping futures are one way to overcome some of these obstacles. And when it comes to environmental decision making, we know that we need all the help we can get. So last weekend, there was a meeting of the leaders of the G7 countries. Later this year, countries will be sending their delegates to COP26 in Glasgow. And some of that feels strangely disconnected from the energy that we've seen in the last couple of years on the streets, where students or grassroots innovators have come together to imagine and suggest new solutions to help shape the future that they want to see. And it's really this large scale behavioral change that will be necessary in order to hit the targets that we've set. So participatory futures offers a way for us to make the connection between the decision makers that typically make decisions and that wellspring of innovation that is coming from the ground. And so before I hand over to my speakers who'll be telling us about their work and how it links to this broader theme of more inclusive approaches to building a future together, I want to leave you with a suggestion of a potential future where we undertake collective decision making linked to environmental issues in a different way. It's based on a project that we developed together with Dark Matter Labs and Lucid Minds last year. And it brings together community action with new technology such as AI agents and simulations, and also feedback mechanisms and peer learning to help communities actually discuss the kind of values and priorities that they have for action at that local scale, and to make commitments together as individuals and also as a group in order to then create the action that they want to see. So that's my pitch for participatory futures. And next, I'll hand over to each of our panelists in turn to tell us about the work that they're doing, their pitch for participatory futures. So first of all, we have BT Wolf, who is a multimedia artist and musician. She'll be telling us about her work From Green to Red, which is currently on show at the London Design Biennale, where she has worked with data from NASA that examines the human impact on the environment. Over to you, BT.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so conscious of time and keeping this brief, wonderful to be here. The work that I do, more broadly speaking, is really about taking the best of the old and the best of the new, essentially reimagining a deeper experience around music and art that we sort of lost when we moved from physical to digital, and bringing in a lot of those components that kind of got lost along the way: tangibility, storytelling, ceremony. So typically my album designs, which I did a solo exhibition at the V&A of, are kind of bridging the digital physical. And ultimately about, the intention behind all of them is to remind people of the value of art to our humanity, but also nature. Art and nature are core to our humanity. Technology is not core. And actually, nature is perhaps our greatest technology of all. So just to give that as a brief sort of context, this project that you're seeing currently is my latest sort of innovation, which is taking 800,000 years of historic climate data that I got from a friend at NASA, and sort of translating that into a woven timeline of the planet, specifically looking at human impact on the planet, which you're seeing right now. And, this came about because since seeing An Inconvenient Truth in 2006, I was a teenager at the time, and I left the cinema just so furious that we were where we were, so conscious of the fact that we were kind of on a major sliding scale, just, basically of doom. And I was sort of amazed that, that information was new to me. So I wrote this song From Green to Red, which was actually the track that, goes along with that video visualization you saw. And that was now, 15 years ago. And I thought, well, I don't need to record this. Everyone will see the film and we'll be on a totally different path. And obviously that didn't happen. So 2 years ago, I'd given a talk about my work at JPL, NASA's JPL. And following that, one of the chief engineers was showing me these climate data graphs, atmospheric CO2 data. And I had that same moment of just like, what the F? How have we not really progressed at all from that point, 15 years prior? And I realized that for a lot of people, data is cold, it's impenetrable, it's intangible. So my whole idea was to use the power of art and music to essentially make that something people could relate to, so that in 10 seconds they could get a sense of where we are right now. The entire visualization, which I don't know if you saw just then, but you see the entire planetary timeline and the human impact very clearly. And that's currently on display at the London Design Biennale, where people can actually interact with the piece. They can move their hand over the fabric to pull out the specific parts per million and planetary date at that specific point. And, I was able to actually share that work. I was invited to share that work at the Nobel Prize Summit just a month ago, Our Planet, Our Future, following Sir David Attenborough and Al Gore. So it was amazing to be part of that conversation because, really, I don't think we're moving fast enough at all. I think once you become aware of something, it's impossible to become unaware of it almost, but we need to activate awareness on a major scale, and we need to get over ourselves as human beings and look to nature, where actually all of the technology, wisdom, secrets, intelligence lies. But we as human beings are, cursed with a huge amount of hubris. So we think that we're going to invent the next best solution, but actually it already exists in the natural world. We just need to see that.
Much beauty. Very provocative introduction there. I think will stimulate a lot of our debate later. And now I'll hand over to Janet Raffner, who joins us from the Center for Hybrid Intelligence in Denmark, who'll talk to us about human AI collaboration in creating visions of future.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks, Bidi. That was very inspiring. My work also draws on art, but as Alex said, it's a combination of human and AI art, where the general public are the creators. And so my work is centered on exploring hybrid intelligence, or these optimal synergies between humans and AI. And as part of this, I've taken a deep dive into creativity, human, AI, and co-creativity. And in particular, myself and my collaborators have developed a large-scale game-based creativity assessment portfolio called CREA. And as an extension to this work, we developed a special computational co-creativity tool adapted for participatory futures. And by computational co-creativity, I mean it combines machine learning with human intentionality for creative expression. And we have scaffolded this interaction through the game design, which you're seeing here, to afford participants the ability to explore a huge possibility space of these different images, while minimizing error or creative blocks and anxieties, enabling the user to create products which they may not have been able to based on their own abilities. And so here you can see a little bit of the process. Participants, this project was launched last December, along with in conjunction with AI for Good, so a global summit in conjunction with the UN. In this initial phase, we had thousands of people who were blending images and tagging them as either a utopian or a dystopian future. And so there are lots of different images that they can use as a base and then adjust either the content or the style of them. And ultimately, the hope for this tool is that it becomes not just a mechanism for envisioning futures, but also to start dialogues as a social network tool. So here you can see some of the collaborative features. Participants can go in and vote on the particular images that they like, and then they can also choose to build off of other images that have been created. So here you can decide from the gallery an image that you think is very interesting, but you yourself want to tweak. And then you can spread the genes from one person to the next in this dialogue about particular topics. And in this case, we were exploring utopian or dystopian futures, but the wonderful nature of these co-creative systems is that it's quite easy to reframe in different contexts. And so we can use the same tool as a catalyst for dialogue on a variety of different sustainable development goal topics. And so my hope is that it becomes a tool to use at events where both the general public can create images, and it to be used as a conversation starter for these topics around participatory futures.
Thanks, Janet. That's really exciting. I'd love to play with it a bit more.
Yes,
myself
and it's available
as well.
online, so anyone can play it. So it's freely available.
So moving on to our next speaker, if I can change the slides, we have Elias Fernandez, who is a researcher based at the AI Lab in Belgium, who works on dilemmas where there is a collective risk involved. So often when we think about the environment, we don't necessarily frame it in terms of risk, but that's the kind of framing that is used in the experiments carried out in Elias's lab. And specifically, they work with AI agents as a part of collective decision making in order to understand the impact of assigning agency to AI to make decisions.
Thanks a lot, Alex, and thanks for the introduction, and also for inviting me to this panel with such talented people. Well, as Alex has said, in my research, I investigate collective decision making in situations that involve some form of collective risk, such as climate change. And what I have found is that humans are not very good at coordinating their efforts to avoid some form of future disaster or catastrophe. And this is in some ways because of short-term thinking. And so what is important here, and what I've been looking, is to avoid the short-term thinking and to nudge in some way people to think more about the future. And the issue is that climate change has several inherent uncertainties, such as we don't know how much time we still have available to revert the current situation. So in the past 2 years, I have been looking at new ways to improve coordination among human groups. And in particular, I have been looking at how can we use AI and artificial agents to make humans coordinate better. And the reason for this is that a lot of the information that we get nowadays and that influences our opinion is coming from social media or YouTube videos, which have been filtered and often recommended to us by AI systems. And this has an impact on our decisions, and we must understand what it is. And well, through my research, I've found that this impact can be positive. And in fact, by delegating certain key decisions to artificial agents, we can make humans coordinate better. And in our context, this happens because these artificial agents are acting as commitment devices. They nudge people to think more about the future consequences of their actions by making them make long-term plans and stick to them. And this is positive. This improves their coordination. However, we also see that people are not very happy at giving away their agency to these agents and accepting their decisions. So one of the things that I'd like to bring to the table in this panel is that we need to find new ways to increase engagement with these new AI tools, which ultimately are good for improving social outcomes. And also, we need to find what is the trade-off or the midterm between giving away our agency to AI and still retaining some control over our decisions. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Elias. I think that's a fascinating way to like leave us before the discussion. So how much of our agency about long-term decision making related to the environment should we be giving away if we know that potentially the outcomes for the collective will be more beneficial? But we will get to that, I hope, after we hear from our final speaker, Katie Patrick, who is a designer, an environmental engineer, an entrepreneur who works with data, behavioral change, and gamification techniques to help inspire new thinking about how people make choices about their energy use and other choices that they make which have a consequence for the environment.
So what I'm talking about here to talk about today is this relationship between doom thinking and visionary solutions-based utopian thinking, and how that relates to the way that we approach environmental change, and how this fits with, and how this ended up fitting into data and AI. And you see, for too long, our movements use these messages about doom and concepts that are perilous and scary, as you can see in the images, showing pollution, showing the effects of climate change. And this is a central narrative of the environmental movement. But now there's a new kind of thinking brewing, and it's really exciting. It's a type of zeitgeist for imagining the world that we do want instead of the world that we don't want. As you can see in some of these utopian images I've got here of a vertical forest, an apartment building covered with trees. This beautiful animation that you can see right now of imagining what if we greenified cities and made them into these lush, beautiful ecotopia environments. And this type of imagination we can use, for example, with augmented reality and types of games like Laura mentioned. But once we have a vision, we can start to think of, well, how do we want the data to be in this new world? What's our utopian dream? And we distill it into numbers. And that's where we go into this Fitbit for the planet design that I do, which is looking at getting the numbers and displaying them publicly, and then looking at how we can reverse engineer these numbers into existence, kind of like Fitbit for the planet. It's a goal we want to get to, and we can get these data feeds in real time and disclose them to people to try and bring about that sense of agency. And that's the core type of design work I do around the data. And it's the imagination is essential because new research is coming out showing that looking at utopian images, looking at images of the world that we do want, actually filter down into people's behavior. And they also, it helps encourage type of innovation and ideas thinking that we want to have. And the research has also shown that images of doom or negative images about climate change, they don't encourage action, and they actually cause a shutting down and a lack of attention. And there's new neuroscience coming out showing that it's actually quite bad for the brain, ineffective, to show these negative doom-like images. And in the last slide, if you could see that there is this what I'm trying to manifest is this I have a dream moment for the planet, and something that I've called Earth Imagination Day. It doesn't exist as a day, but I hope it will exist one day, where we can all take some time to imagine the world we do want. We need, like Martin Luther King's statement, an I have a dream vision for the world, so then we can start reverse engineering that world into existence. So that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. That's fantastic. And I think it sets us up really well for the discussion that we're going to have. So I guess building on Katie's example of why it's important to have public imagination and positive images for collective participation in decision making around the future of the world, the environment, the climate, I'd like to pass that over to each of you in turn. Could you let me know why you think this idea of collective public imagination, participatory futures, is so vital for the decisions we're making around climate change? And what is the role of technology in that as well? Janet, could you maybe start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to build off something that Katie just mentioned about the importance of a day or a time to enable people to imagine the future. Well, all of these decisions about our sustainable future are value-based. And for making these processes, it can't solely lie in the hands of the legislators, but it's very difficult to just say to the people, okay, imagine what it would be like. So I think that it really lies in the hands of researchers and practitioners to provide scaffolding, to empower the public in both forming opinions and also formulating those opinions and preferences. So this scaffolding can come in many different forms. Alex, you presented a few different ways through modeling, through art, through discussions, and the way that I choose to scaffold interactions or test scaffolding of interactions is through these co-creative systems.
Viti, you finished your talk on a note drawing on human creativity rather than necessarily the kind of technology that we're using. So I'd like to bring you in here to give your take on why it's important to have participation, public imagination around these issues that are really kind of the vital challenge of our time, and if technology does have a role to play.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I think, it's all about discernment. There's no one size fits all. There's no one great thing that's going to solve this. And I think the issues with technology are that, technology has fast-tracked a lot of what it means to be human on the planet without reflecting the true cost or value in the process. So we've ended up with a lot of noise, no curation, a lot of access, no value, and a lot of the decisions we made earlier on that we thought were innovative, we're now realizing there are planetary costs that we hadn't factored in. So I think that's really key to remember in all of this discussion. We can't just assign it to someone else or something else. And there's also an aspect of the human touch being really important. It's the human imperfection, the intention that actually really moves us and makes us absorb something to begin with. That's actually what the power of art is. It's not in, the perfectly modeled, perfectly designed, perfectly airbrushed experience. It's in the cracks within that. So, I think it's just ultimately about realizing our limitations, realizing we need limitations, because, again, what we've kind of realized over time is that we've become very good at bypassing limitations within the natural world and the natural systems. So I do think it's a crisis, and I do think it's important that people realize that and see that. That doesn't mean we don't reimagine or imagine a better future and what we want, but I think it's really, really important as part of that discussion.
Great, thank you. You mentioned that it's not as easy as just assigning a responsibility to some kind of technology solution. So Elias, I think you know what's coming. I'd like to draw you in based on your research of, could you tell us a little bit more how the assigning of responsibility in your experiments works and what the implications are?
Yeah, of course. Thanks a lot. I do find very interesting the points that both Janet and Betty are making. For me, it's also very clear, even though my research is not so much on the effect of creativity, is more related to what is the effect of strategic decision making. To be able to imagine the future implies being able to make long-term plans, to actually think of what you want to achieve at a certain point. And this is really important. This is what I'm finding through my research. I do agree with Betty that we should not just hope that some magic technology is going to solve all the issues for us. But technology, I think, has a very important role here to play, and is to help us in obtaining information in a particular way so that we can make decisions better. Because we have a lot of noise around us, and I think BT, you said that in your first speech, and it's important to. And I really think technology can help filter that noise in some ways, and by delegating some of the actions or the decisions that we have to make on our daily basis, we can focus on some other things, and this can perhaps be helpful. We're already doing this with a lot of things. We don't make, or at least I don't make any decision anymore on how to go to a certain place. I just ask Google. nowadays. Obviously, this has some implications. It has some effect on traffic. It has some effect on how you, in what type of transportation you take at a certain moment. The question is whether this effect can be positive.
I'm going to move us on to the second question and come over to you first, Katie. So a few of those replies kind of spoke to limitations that we have as people in being able to engage with some of this information. So a lot of the language around climate change and even thinking on that scale is pretty difficult. I know I find it really difficult to kind of imagine and engage with. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the way that you use data and gamification or other techniques in order to help make some of those intangible effects more tangible, so that we can start to really understand how they affect our actions and decision making.
Thank you. And it's quite a big process to do that. I mean, if you look at the climate data, it's like everything affects climate, right, and sustainability. So you can literally have thousands of actions and different types of technologies. And I don't mean fancy technology. I mean even simple technology like a compost bin, right? And how you actually turn that into something usable. So what I do is I go through a behavior mapping process, which I've learned from user interface design textbooks. It's nothing particularly fancy, but it tends to a lot of the skills that we learn in user interface design and behavioral psychology, the psychology of influence, of advertising, of storytelling. It has not really filtered through to the sustainability and environment community or profession, which is made up of environmental engineers like me and environmental scientists, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers. And we literally absolutely do not get any education or even exposure to other types of industries or thinking or research that has to do with working with the human mind and human emotions and soul and all of that kind of thing. And so anyway, user interface design, go through a behavior, a story mapping process where I very detailedly identify who everybody is that you want to influence. It's basically breaking down what you want to get people to do as granular and as detailed as possible, because ultimately someone's going to have to write this into computer code somewhere. So it has to be very detailed. Like, are we trying to affect, parents? Are we trying to affect teachers? Is it a government official? Is it a CEO? Is it somebody to sign up on policy? Is it somebody who owns a car? We want to get car owners to do something differently. Figure out who they all are and then go through the process of what is cueing them. How will they first hear about it? What are the different behavioral nudges that you want them to do? What is the action you ultimately want them to take? I mean, that's something that sounds so obvious, but it falls off the end of most projects that are like, oh yeah, we want to get people to do all these things, but without actually really detailedly thinking through what they are and breaking those up. Do you want them to compost? Do you want them at home, at work? And do you want them to buy a different car or give up a car? You're just throwing all these like random actions at people. Be very, very surgical about it, and then looking at the data. What data are you working with? Can you get the data in a feedback loop? Can you show it to people in real time? If you don't have real time, what's the next best thing? Satellites, sensors, different ways of getting the data, and then looking through all gamification nudges. There's about 10 of them to choose from. Comparison, giving people smiley faces, cute animals that smile at you when you do a good job or frown at you when you don't. Using color, red is good, green is bad. And then looking into the reward system. After somebody's done a good job, done the action, we say good job, right? And tracking that progress. It's a detailed process of unweaving the big, kind of like a rat's nest of stuff, of data and stuff we need to do into very discrete processes, so you can design prompts and interfaces that can sort of move people through that. So it's a process that I've been cultivating for years to try and get good at this process and figuring out how to apply this sort of critical thinking framework to teasing out this process. So start with read up on user story mapping to get started. Is I think a good place.
That's really great. Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's like focusing on the details and where we want to end up, what we want to achieve, is a really good place to start, and really knowing what technology and data can do to get us there and what specific role they can play, rather than offering them all as a kind of umbrella solution. I'm curious, Beatty, how maybe the more kind of creative disciplines are helping us to engage with these topics and to overcome some of the barriers of understanding that we have. Based on your work, what can you kind of say to that question?
Yeah, well, so, my work throughout my career, and career sounds like a weird thing, it is just my life, really. Work and life are very much the same. I work with all different types of astrophysicists, engineers. I have a music dementia research project where I worked with neuroscientists looking at the power of music for people living with dementia. Obviously, the climate project was working with NASA scientists and data. I'm constantly working with people from totally different fields and realizing these amazing stories that aren't necessarily able to be told by the people that have the most knowledge about them. So actually, that's really, yes, it is creative, but it's also scientific, it's also technological, it's also design-led, it's also, health benefits. So I think we've kept things siloed as well for so long. We're very good at putting things in boxes and giving things labels and then treating it accordingly. I don't buy that. I think that the more that these things can ultimately converse, the more that people can work with other people from different fields, create projects that are bridging these worlds that typically were kept apart, that's where the real understanding is. That's where you can really tell a story that is doing multiple things simultaneously. So yeah, it's funny because obviously when we're talking about technology, the last record I did was the world's first live 360 AR stream. Every one of the projects has been a tech first, but you'd never know that because it's totally inclusive. It's not about the technology. It literally feels like, you're opening up a record and it's coming to life around you in this sort of modern day Fantasia way. And, it's from the quietest room on earth, and it has this whole ceremony to the experience. And there are all these layers, there are all these reasons why. And I think we need, as human beings, to always know why we're doing something. That intention has to be really clear, but simultaneously we have to say, well, why not? Why not go work with that astrophysicist and see if I can learn more and tell a story in that vein? So we have to have the why and the why not simultaneously. We have to have the art and the technology simultaneously. We have to have these things running alongside one another, but knowing all the time how to apply discernment, which, I think is a big shortcoming of human beings. And I think that we individually have to be aware of our blind spots. So it's great saying all of this and then, ordering everything on Amazon and not being conscious about water usage and all of that. But we need to really start appreciating our level of privilege, which is not the majority of the planet, it's a very small part of the planet, is largely to blame for, where we currently are.
Thank you. And for reminding us that actually there's a bigger context here to consider. I guess, as I mentioned, there was just the G7 meeting. We've got COP26 coming up. And governments around the world have started to involve citizens and people living in their countries in generating ideas or debating climate change through typically citizen assemblies. None of those exercises, as far as I'm aware, have made use of any of the new technologies or more creative approaches that we've discussed today or that make up participatory futures. And I guess I want to ask you, why are those barriers in place? Why aren't decision makers making better use of the techniques that you're all pioneering in order to make those discussions, those debates come to life and inspire action? I'm going to ask you, Janet, first to pitch in.
Yeah, sure. I think that my answer is quite short. That in the best cases, these forms of engagement have been successful. But in order to ensure this success, you have to have a trifecta of different stars aligning. You have to have the right stakeholder agreement. You have to have the proper design and the development and the feedback loops. And this just takes time. And I think that it's the those who are in charge of running these big events and setting the stage or apprehensive to adopt a new technology when there haven't been sufficient pilot studies or sufficiently documented results from previous work. And so I think that ultimately we just have to keep working and to do our best to ensure the stakeholder alignment, design, prototyping, development, feedback loops.
Elias, could you add to that? I know that you have spoken before about research that supports this kind of local management of public resources.
Yeah, exactly. So I actually found really interesting what Betty was saying about the necessity of multidisciplinarity, and I think it comes to the fact that we need to add information from different areas to actually be able to make good decisions. We need to add context to decisions. And I think one of the issues is that we've been trying to solve these big problems from a global scale when we also have to look at the local scale. Because, for example, in the place I used to live in Spain, it's very important fishing there. And certain regulations actually limit the livelihood of some people. And I know this is very important, but then they have negative reactions to this. So I think it's very important, this is supported by research, to look at local management of public commons and find ways to take into account the context, the norms, and the cultures of different places, and add this to policies that can actually be helpful to solve climate change on a global scale.
Thank you. And I guess just because we only have 5 minutes left, time really flies when you have such a rich subject. I want to kind of finish with going to each of you to nominate briefly a priority that you think we should focus on for the next 12 months, the next year, in order to really get kind of large-scale change and progress on these issues. So first of all, coming to you, Katie.
Oh, well, I believe that we need to, what I hope to achieve or see happen is we need real-time feedback loops of data for CO2, for electricity, for natural gas, and for petroleum. And they don't exist. I'm trying to build a Fitbit for the planet that displays this data to people so people can get right into the causality. And so if you are doing a creative art project, you do it in a way that will affect the numbers, not a way that people say, that's interesting, cool, and then nothing really happens. We really want all this energy to actually affect the numbers. So we need all of the world, the government and all of the energy companies to put this data out in a way that we can use it. And it's just not up to scratch. We can't do anything. I can't do what I want to do because of this lack of good quality data APIs to sort of just spread this data out in a way that's going to create behavior change, not that's going to be on a PDF that, you know, is downloadable.
Thank you. That's a really practical and tangible goal that I think we can aim for. BT, how about you? What should we prioritize in the near future?
Well, no, I think what Katie said is really true. So going from tangible and sort of practical to, well, it's still tangible, but it's on an individual level. I think for every one of us to be as conscious as possible of our actions and to not waste anything. You know, I think when you look at the amount that each person, you know, per week is sort of wasting in materials, food, you know, resources, electricity, you know, I think as much as we have to have a collective shift, that collective shift is also deeply interconnected with us as an individual. It's like you look at an ecosystem and each species only knows that it will, you know, do well if the whole is doing well. So there's this understanding of interconnection. And I think on a personal individual level, we need to be much more conscious of our actions and our blind spots.
Thanks, BT. And Janet, over to you.
Thanks. So I'd like to focus on mechanisms for engaging the general public. So for reaching out and allowing everyone to express and formulate their ideas and their opinions about the future, and then creating these connections between the general public as well as the policymakers. And I strongly believe that that needs to be done through small pilot studies and through collecting tangible evidence on the benefits of these programs. For example, here in Denmark, in the Climate Summit in August, we'll plan to kickstart a panel discussion with the climate ministers, presenting their pictures of their future utopias or dystopias based on what they've created in Blender SDG, and then the general public will also be creating images alongside and asking questions and using that as a catalyst for discussions.
It sounds really exciting to actually be connected into that circle of decision making. Elias, giving you the final word. Well, actually, that's not true. I'll have the final word, but please go ahead.
Okay, I'll try to be very short. I think, as I said before, it's very important to try to find a way to nudge this long-term thinking, but with context. And I think this is only possible if, as Janet said, we try to engage the public. We try to find new ways to gather this information that each person has about what should be done in the future, what is what they believe a good future would be, and to take that into account for making the plans, the proper plans. And it would be very interesting in investigating that.
Thank you so much, all of you, for your fantastic suggestions and call to actions. It's really, I don't know, inspiring for me to hear the continuous references to the importance of diversity and interdisciplinarity within whatever approaches we start to take. So I work on collective intelligence. That is at the heart of collective intelligence is a diversity of perspectives and viewpoints. And I think that's also at the heart of participatory futures approaches. There's been, I think, between us a lot of calls to action during the discussion today. And I hope that the viewers, the people who've joined us, have also been inspired to take action. Certainly, if they're in the UK, never is it more resonant to think about the environment than on one of the hottest days of the year. So please do get in touch to learn more about how we can start creating more of a movement about participatory futures. And thanks for joining us.
Gosh, thank you so much for such a thought-provoking, informative and mind-bending and stirring conversation. Huge thanks to Alex, Beatty, Katie, Elias and Janet. Thank you for joining us on the Planet and Smart City stage today. I'm sure that you'll agree with me that we have lots to decompress and review and sink in, not only from that session, but also from the last few days here at CogX 2021. I can't believe that was indeed the last session on the Planet and Smart City stage. I'd just like to take a moment to say thank you to the sponsors of the conference, Accenture, BT, Quantum Black, Visa, and all of the supporters. We couldn't do this without all the speakers who have given their time, whether it was in person at our hybrid stages, whether it was virtual, and a huge thank you to all of the team working behind the scenes, and particularly today, behind the scenes with me, making me look good. We have AJ, Olivia, Jen, Monique, Tom, Belle, and so many others. So thank you to everybody. But most of all, I want to thank all of you out there who've joined us virtually, and to say thank you for all of your questions that you've sent across to us, all of the interactions and all of the tweets. We very much hope that you'll come back and join us again next year. Let's use the learnings of this past year as a driver to really create impactful change over the next 10 that we're really building and directing from this conference. My name is Anushka Sharma. It has been wonderful to be your virtual MC here on the Planet and Smart City stage. I'll see you next year.